to my channel. So I'm carrying on reviewing The Invisible Doctrine, The Secret History of Neoliberalism from where I got up to last time. Thank you all for your comments, and I will do a comments video when I've finished going over the book. So I just got up to the bit where, just after where I was talking about the self-attribution fallacy, where I was talking about how neoliberalism sets people apart, and by setting people apart, we suffer. Interestingly, social pain is processed by the same neural circuits as physical pain. So social connection actually reduces physical pain. It's a powerful analgesic. And also they've shown that opioids relieve both physical agony and loneliness. And there are links between loneliness, social disconnect, and drug addiction as well, because people self-medicate as a way of, because the opioids actually target the same parts of the brain, so they relieve both physical pain and also social pain as well, which is interesting. Emotional pain is protective. You know, just like physical pain is protective. If you've hurt yourself, it's like your body's way of saying you need to be careful. You know, you need to kind of take shelter, as it were. You know, it's like pain is a kind of signal to, you know, to be careful, to step back, kind of thing, to look after yourself. In the same way, emotional pain protects us from social injury, as it drives people to reconnect. Survival among social animals is enhanced when they are strongly bonded with the rest of the group. Isolated animals are most likely to starve or be predated. So that's part of the reason why social ostracism, or being cast out of the group, is experienced as so painful, because it basically puts you at greater risk of harm. You know, if you're cast out, you're all alone, you're isolated, you're at greater risk. So our psychological and economic welfare depends on connection with others. So this whole neoliberal idea, we should be isolated, we should look out for number one, that it's weak to rely on others, that we mustn't be dependent on others. That actually goes against the grain of how we are actually wired up, and how, as a social species, we actually rely and depend on others. We're a group species, we're a herd species. You know, often people kind of like use that rather disparagingly, like people behaving like sheep, which I don't really understand, but anyway, that's actually intelligent. You know, like, I mean, yeah, that is kind of, in fact, used pejoratively. But, you know, a sheep, I mean, obviously we're not sheep, but, you know, just using it as an analogy, like a sheep, all on its own, is at great risk of being predated. It's intelligent for sheep, as quite weak on their own, to group together. So that's the intelligent. It would be a stupid sheep to be on its own. And the same really applies to humans as well. Like, on our own we're weak, together we're strong. You know, so it's actually unnatural to have to do everything on your own. You know, that's not how, as a social species, we're set up. So we're interdependent. We rely on others, like as a web of social connections. Like every single person, even the most autonomous person in a group, will still rely on others to some extent. No one is completely independent. That's a myth. So then the book looks at think tanks and lobby groups who used what is called dark money. I hadn't actually heard of that term before, dark money. But they use what's called dark money, and that's, or get funded, I should say, sorry, get funded by dark money. Think tanks and lobby groups are funded by dark money, and that's cash whose purpose is to influence political outcomes. The reason it's called dark money is because its sources are not fully disclosed, so it's opaque. We don't know where the money's coming from. It's veiled in secrecy, which is why it's called dark money, because there's no transparency there. And this obviously deeply threatens democracy, because democracy is based upon transparency. It's based upon, accountability. So if we don't know where the money is coming from, we don't have democracy. So political outcomes are bought by money, by very powerful interests that we don't know about because they're hidden. That's deeply troubling. The book also talks about how the shrinking neoliberal state is highly selective. So I've talked about this already, where in neoliberalism the state is shrunk back. That's to say, the part of the state gets shrunk back is the part that is supposed to improve public welfare. So the welfare arm of the state under neoliberalism is shrunk back. But meanwhile, there's also expanding government power over the lives of ordinary citizens. So the controlling arm of the state is actually strengthened in neoliberalism, while the supportive welfare arm of the state is rolled back. So it's not the case that all of the state is rolled back, it's highly selective. And then it talks about, as I've already touched on already, how oligarchs, influence politicians, but they don't just influence Tory politicians, they don't just influence Republican politicians either. They also influence Labour and Democratic politicians too. For example, Bill Clinton's so-called third way policies were actually formulated by a lobby group called the Democratic Leadership Council. And sitting on its executive council were representatives of some of the biggest corporations in the US. Under such influences, Clinton continued neoliberal programs by replacing government regulation with self-regulation. And he repealed in 1999 he repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which was introduced in the New Deal era in response to the 1929 stock market crash and depression. And this act had separated commercial and financial banks as a safeguard against the power of the financial sector and as a firewall impeding the possibility of contagious collapse. And this repeal by Clinton tore down that firewall, leading to a massive expansion of the financial frontier, resulting in boom, bust and quit. And the repeal of this act was a major contributing factor in the bank failures of 2008, the financial crisis in 2008, deregulation. Now, in the 1950s in London, two disciples of Hayek, Anthony Fisher and Oliver Smedley, founded the first of Europe's neoliberal think tanks, called the Institute of Financial Affairs. This institute was treated by the BBC as an independent source of opinion, and its staff were incredibly faithful to the neoliberal script. They often appear on current affairs programmes, for example. Its funding and on whose behalf it operates were rarely questioned. So again, dark money, dark influences. And the Institute refuses to disclose its funding sources. Successive governments delegate policy making to corporate-funded lobby groups. The Institute for Economic Affairs is highly opaque. It refuses to disclose where their money comes from. But investigators assembled parts of the picture. The think tanks are funded by billionaires and oil, coal, finance, and tobacco companies. Antisocial industries, or those with the most to lose, invest most in politics. Okay, so I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on reviewing. So moving over to video number 2.